Thanks, Mark. Shabbat Shalom, friends. Wonderful to be here with you. Madim Lasimcha, Sukkot Sameach, Happy Sukkot. So, as we sit into Shabbat together today, I want to lift up some themes, some invitations from this time of Sukkot that have been very alive for me, and that also connect to the beautiful and powerful reading from Shmot, from Exodus, that we read on Chol HaMoed Sukkot, that we'll read tomorrow. On Sukkot, as we are invited to spend time sitting in these temporary structures, these beautiful temporary structures of the Sukkot, the Sukkah, we are connecting in a sense to our vulnerability through this more direct encounter and exposure with the natural world, right? With the schach on top, we're meant to see the stars. The walls are not complete. The whole structure is permeable. It's almost as if it's like just as much of a structure as it can be while still being directly exposed to the elements. Almost minimal in a sense, yet still being strong. And so there's a way in which we are exposed to the elements, directly encountering the natural world, and at the same time invited to feel how even in that vulnerability, we are held and protected in this Sukkot Shalom, the sanctuary of peace that our tradition sometimes likens to actually a divine embrace, a divine hug, or the rechem, the womb of protection, or even the clouds of glory that are known to have followed Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, as they navigated the wilderness in the Torah. And as we, in this holiday, as well as we pray for rain in this time, we're praying for our sustenance and our livelihood for the year to come, connecting to our absolute permeability to this world and our total and utter dependence on it for our sustenance and for our lives. And I believe that it's through this vulnerability, it's through this embrace of and experience of our vulnerability, or even just acknowledgement of our vulnerability, that we have the opportunity to connect with faith, emunah. There's a teaching from Chassidut. Again, I mentioned that the Sukkah represents the clouds of glory that surrounded the people of Israel in the desert. And there's this teaching from the Rebbe of Rushin that those clouds of glory that followed the people through the wilderness were formed of the collective exhale of the Jewish people. Maybe we can even do that now. We can just take a collective exhale. And I find this to be so beautiful because often we think that first we need to experience our security, right? We need to feel that we are protected and safe and secure, and then we can relax, and then we can exhale and let go. But I believe that there's an invitation here actually to consider the way that when we exhale and when we can relax and let go first, that actually might then make us available to sense and feel the ways that we are protected and guided. So a beautiful invitation to actually let go in that act of faith, to feel the way that we are held even in our vulnerability. And I think we can bring a similar approach to the invitation for joy in this season. This is Zman Simchatenu, the season of our joy. And again, in a similar way, I find it so beautiful that even as we are in supplication, praying for our rain, really praying for our lives in the coming year, that we need rain in order to grow food, to sustain ourselves. That prayer itself is a prayer that is meant to be utterly joyous And so similarly to our faith, it's like the habitual way of relating to joy might be to think that, well, first I need to receive whatever it is that I'm praying for and longing for, and then I can connect to joy. But this is flipping that. This invitation is actually saying, no, first you connect to your joy and you really invite and feel that joy. And with and through that joy, we pray for our lives. And, I think it's just so powerful to consider that there's a joy that we can actually feel and access and call upon that is not dependent on our prayers being answered, and perhaps even is part of what draws those prayers to us. And so my experience has been that this quality of joy and this quality of faith, the faith that we can access indeed through our vulnerability, can bring us close to God's presence. Which brings us to this beautiful Torah reading that we'll read tomorrow for Chol HaMoed from Shemot, which includes a lot of powerful moments, including the inscribing of the second set of tablets. But one of those moments that I want to share with you is the one in which Moses asks to behold the presence of God. And God says, you cannot see my face. Lo tuchal lirot et panai. You cannot see my face. Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. For a human being may not see me and live. So God says, no, you cannot see me, for you may not see me and live. However, God says, when my presence passes by, I'll put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. And then I will take my hand away and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. You will see my back, but my face must not be seen. So what does this mean? That Moses can see God's back, but not God's face. And I want to share with you a teaching that has been really impactful for my mindfulness practice, actually, from one of my teachers, Rabbi Jeff Roth. The way that he interprets this moment is that Moses seeing God's back actually means that Moses gets to see through God's eyes. So rather than seeing God's face, Moses can see through God's eyes, moving from this kind of dualistic encounter with God as something other that we see outside ourselves to a more non-dual experience of God being within us and all around us. And that this is what it means that you may not see my face and live, but you can look through my eyes and live. That it's through this looking through God's eyes and this more intimate and non-dual relationship with the divine that we can truly live. And so in this time of Sukkot, in this encounter with our permeability, our vulnerability, our connection to our elemental world, in this invitation of faith and of joy, with that kind of presence, I think that we can consider what it might mean to look through God's eyes, to be close to God in this way. And so with that, I want to invite us into some practice together. Settling into your body. Settling into the place that you find yourself in today. Relaxing and allowing. Something about opening to what is here in the present moment that is innately vulnerable. There is an innate vulnerability in opening and softening and allowing what is here to be here. And that's the invitation. As you settle into your body, I invite you to soften the body. We open and soften the heart to just feel whatever is here. Allowing this direct encounter with this very moment, with this reality, just as it is. And allowing that exhale of emunah, of faith. When we notice some constriction or some holding, noticing the mind wandering, or if there's any tendency to be seeking something or fixing, grasping. Just a gentle exhale. Letting go. Gently relaxing into trust. Trusting that it's okay to just be as we are, to just be present in this very moment. That what we need is here. Noticing again the mind wandering and gently exhaling. Letting go, softening and opening. we notice any vulnerability in the heart or the body, what happens when we soften, when we exhale into trust, that quiet quality of faith. And is there joy to be found? Is there something to enjoy, no matter how subtle, in this experience of opening to what's here? Is there something to enjoy? What if that was the only instruction? And what would it mean to look through God's eyes upon this very moment? I want to end our sit together with a poem, a poetic rendition of a teaching from the Midrash, from Breshit Rabbah, that I found in this book called Earth Prayers, inspired in this time of Sukkot to connect with our natural world. And God saw everything that God had made and found it very good. And God said, "This is a beautiful world that I have given you. Take good care of it. Do not ruin it." It is said, before the world was created, the Holy One kept creating worlds and destroying them. Finally, God created this one and was satisfied. God said to Adam, to the human, "This is the last world I shall make. I place it in your hands. Hold it in trust."
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Friends, we seal the practice as we do every day by offering those of you who are in mourning or observing a yard site, or if it's your custom to participate, to recite the mourner's Kaddish and to put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat box, either now or after we recite the Kaddish. And if you're not reciting Kaddish today, we hope and encourage you to stay present, stay with your practice, and help create a minyan of comfort and support for those in mourning, who I invite to join me by rising in body and spirit to recite the words. And thanks to Kat for sharing the words of the Kaddish on the screen. Gadal, Vid Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, Noah, Vidrat, Vidute, Vidich, Chaye Chon, Yome Chon, Chaye Techal Beit Israel, Hagalah, Bizman Kariv, Amru, Amen. Ishmei Rabba Mevarach, Olam Ulame Almaya, Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Ar, Yitamam, Yitadar, Yitalev, Yitabal, Shvei, Dekisha, B'Yichlu. Elam, Kol Birkata, B'Shirat, Ushbechata, V'Nechamata, Amiran Ba'alma, Amru, Amen. Ishlama Rabba Maya, Chaim, Amen. Kol Yisrael, Amru, Amen. Shalom B'Mamav, Yaseh Shalom, Kol Yisrael, Kol Yoshvei Tevel, Amru, Amen.
Amen.
Friends, thanks so much for joining us today. I want to wish everyone a sweet and restorative Shabbat on a beautiful end to Sukkot, and a Chag Sameach on Sunday night as we close out this season, the holiday season, and very much looking forward to being with you next week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesday will be led by Rabbi Susan Leiter. On Thursday by Rabbi Jenny Solomon, and Rebecca will be back next Friday to lead us into Shabbat Breshit. As I mentioned, Rebecca will be leading us in general on Fridays and connecting our practice through teaching based on the weekly Torah portion beginning next week. First Torah portion as we begin a new cycle of Torah next week with Parshat Breshit, the beginning of the book of Genesis. And it was a nice little segue there, Rebecca. Thank you at the end. If you're staying on, we invite you to share your reflections on the practice, or if you have a question to put to Rebecca, please put it in the chat box. And if it's a question, if you would preface it by writing question in all caps, makes it easier to keep an eye on it. So let's invite Rebecca in. And I do want to thank Blima Moss so much for sponsoring our practice today and offering that really beautiful dedication. And of course, as always, Kat Esposito, who's holding our sukkah, our tech sukkah, beautifully, as always, as well. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It was just so beautiful. What a great, really kind of located us right where we are in the calendar. So one question I have to begin with, because there was a lot of richness in your teaching, a lot of different aspects, one of which I find particularly, I don't know, I guess challenging, but also, interesting intellectually, but also challenging emotionally is, you mentioned that Sukkot is really a time when we experience a sense of vulnerability, right? And it's connected, but it's connected to joy, to experiencing joy. So I wanted to, one would think those will not necessarily go together, right? Because vulnerability calls up, this is something we touched on the last couple of days also with Mira, brings up a sense of anxiety, fear, exposure. Maybe you might say a little bit about, how do we find joy in being vulnerable?
Thanks, Mark. I always love your questions. I have a few thoughts I'll share. One, I think there is so much richness for us in the symbolism of the holiday of Sukkot. So, in the symbol of the Sukkah itself, as I mentioned, it's about as bare bones as it can be in terms of the way, like, actually how it can protect us from the elements while still being structurally sound, right? And it's also meant to be beautiful and a place where we sit in and relax in and eat in and sing and pray in and be together within. And that is qualitatively different than an experience of going out and sitting in the natural world with no structure, which I've done actually. There's a spiritual practice in many traditions of, it's called a vision fast or a vision quest, where you go out and you really have that direct encounter with nature, and that can be very, very raw. But the sukkah is different than that, right? It's not saying that, like, here you are alone, just facing the world and the elements and this reality of our interdependence. But there is this sukkah, there is this sanctuary of peace that is beautiful and temporary. But it's in that temporariness, I think, that it's in a way, there's a way in which personally I feel like we can actually feel the love and the faith even more than if we were sitting in like a brick house with all of those securities that seem like they are more trustworthy. It's actually like through the vulnerability of relationship and not transaction, right? But really trusting that that trust is possible, because it requires that relationship with the world, with one another, with the divine. And I think through that trust that the joy of relationship is possible. It's like when we can actually let go a little bit, allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and through that vulnerability, open to receive and to be taken care of. That's where the deeper sense of love and joy can then bubble up from.
Yeah, I mean, not using the word, but it sounds like really, it really sounds like intimacy, right? It's
Right.
that intimacy is possible, and so the joy that you're describing is really connected with intimacy, which is really lovely, because obviously, like the pinnacle or the peak of the arc, the trajectory of the Jewish year is leading us into Simchat Torah, whether people observe it Sunday, Monday, or Monday, Tuesday, which, a process which began back in the summer, either on Tisha B'Av or even before that, of moving from grief all the way through the arc to joy. And that joy is this intimacy, which really is represented by Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I loved how you connected it then with this Shabbat's Parsha and the reading, and this interpretation of God, Moses not being able to see God's face, but God's back, and bring in Jeff Roth's teaching about about understanding that as seeing the world through divine eyes, or from God's perspective in a way. which is maybe another way of describing intimacy, right? Of like, like the illusion of having different perspectives kind of falls away and realize there's really one true perspective, right? The divine perspective, which we all have the capacity to share in. And at the same time, since we live in a dualistic world and a fragmented world, and we're all in our own bodies, whatever, we also have our own perspectives, which is why, we argue with the people we love, right? And disagree with them and struggle with them. But under that is this idea of intimacy of like, we're on the same page, right? I'm blessed to have a partner who will say to me, who will remind me, because I forget all the time, we're on the same team. Uh-huh. We're on the same team here. And I'm always very moved when she says that. I'm always like, oh, right. We're on the same team, that we share this perspective. And there is a joy in that. So I want to really thank you for that. That was really so beautiful. Scrolling through a lot of appreciation in the comments, just looking to see if there are any questions. This is beautiful poem here from Carolyn. Maybe I'll just read it. Joy does not arrive with a fanfare on a red carpet strewn with the flowers of a perfect life. Joy sneaks in as you pour a cup of coffee, watching the sun hit your favorite tree just right. And you usher joy away because you're not ready for it. Your house is not as it must be for such a distinguished guest. But joy cares nothing for your messy home or your bank balance or your waistline, you see. Joy is supposed to slither through the cracks of your imperfect life. That's how joy works. You cannot invite her. You can only be ready when she appears, and hug her with meaning, because in this very moment, joy chose you. I don't know who that is, Carolyn, but that's really just maybe somebody does. It's so beautiful. And I love the idea of it coming in through the cracks, right? The sukkah, about letting it find us in the sukkah. Anything you want to add, Rebecca? It's like, it was just so beautiful. Oh, here's a question from Susan. Any thoughts about this? And the said I was trying to look through God's eyes. Okay, I think that's this practice of seeing through the divine eyes. And I saw judgment. I judged and I made myself try and see love. So how about that?
Yeah. That makes sense. Especially coming off of the days of judgment.
Yeah.
When we're speaking so much of this imagery of God as judge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, well, one thing I'll say is also in our tradition and in our mystical tradition, judgment and love actually really go together. Chesed and Gevurah, that they balance one another. And so that quality of judgment, which I would say with Gevurah, it really is more, I think, about discernment. Judgment has that kind of harsh connotation, whereas discerning, I think, can come from a place of more mindfulness. And that balances chesed, that kind of overflowing loving kindness. And then in the balance between them, what they create together is tiferet, which is really about beauty and harmony and balance, which has so much to do with this holiday of Sukkot, a holiday in which we also are meant to pay attention to beauty. And in a way, it feels also as though Sukkot balances the intensity of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that we just experienced. I had a friend say recently, like, thank God for Sukkot. I know a lot of us, maybe we're tired of all these holidays, it's a lot. But my friend was like, thank God for Sukkot, because imagine if we just went from the intensity of Yom Kippur and like that encounter with our mortality straight into Cheshvan, this month of kind of like no holidays that's going into winter. But we have Sukkot here to bring us outside, connecting in community for a whole week and invoking joy. And I do think it brings a lot of balance. So, chesed, gevurah, judgment, overflowing love, it's all part of it.
This room for all of it.
Dynamic experience.
Absolutely. I want to also thank Cheryl Shapiro, who's put in the chat, just to let people know, I think this is really worth checking out, this beautiful poem that Cheryl wrote for Sukkot, The Time of Fullness, Welcoming Ushpizin, which has been published on Ritual Well. And Cheryl is a regular with us pretty much every day, and a beautiful writer. So thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing that. One piece we haven't brought in, which I'm not even sure how it fits in at all, but maybe just what you said about how there's space for all of this, and maybe in the way that the sukkah is, right, for every sukkah is a little bit different, and it's open, but it's a structure, and there's a permeability, right, which is kind of the paradigmatic Jewish building. The chuppah is like that. The sukkah is like that, and even the mishkan, which we're going to get to, right, is like that too. Has walls which breathe. Um, Space for everything. So I'm thinking about the tradition of reading Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, also during Sukkot, which is kind of the most, I don't know, ironic. Let's just say ironic. I was going to say cynical, but like there's room for irony too, which in a way, irony kind of it lets us laugh at ourselves and like question ourselves, and like there's room for irony. It can be ironic and a little bit maybe even provocative or provocative to the point of even being a little blasphemous, that it's like you don't have to be so uptight. It's like there's room for lots of different feelings, including the judgment.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what I love about Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, is also the famous line, that there's a time for everything under the sun. So
Right.
there's a time for humor and there's a time for seriousness. And I think that's what's really important. Everything belongs.
Hmm.
What's important is attuning to when is the time for it. When is it appropriate? When is it going to bring balance and be in attunement with what's
Hmm.
happening? So there are times, certainly when I'm teaching meditation or spirituality, where it feels very appropriate and even important to bring in humor and lightness. And then there are times where, it's really more important to feel that gravity of whatever might be happening. So,
Yeah. It
yeah.
connects really nicely actually with I can't remember, I think it was 2 days ago when Mira was teaching, was really talking about kind of opening our gates. Is really was in the context of observance of Sukkot, of opening yourself to kind of radical hospitality and welcoming everything in. And someone brought up the question about like, well, what about boundaries for for those for whom it would not be healthy, right, to invite them in. And just as you were describing this process of discern, there was room for everything,
Mhm.
but there is also a requirement of discernment and gevura, as you were describing, like the judgment is not just something to reject or push away. So like, I'm glad I have that. I'm glad I have that capacity for judgment, maybe over functioning in this case, or maybe it's not. Maybe thanks for, I need to welcome that in as well. And the way you were just describing, is say, okay, how do I use that to say, there's room for everything. And what does this moment call for? What does this moment invite right now? And, and trust the wisdom that we have the capacity to have the wisdom to know, what discernment to make in the moment.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. As always, it's really, I think, speaking on behalf of everyone, I think we're really blessed to have this opportunity, to learn and actually to practice Torah leading into Shabbat each week with you. And I know you're going to be bringing in some of the wisdom from Sam and Yael as well in their teachings, and really excited and looking forward to that this year, as I'm sure we all are. So sweet Shabbat to everyone. Chag Sameach, Modim L'Simcha, the whole Megillah, the whole ball of wax. And we will see you on the other side of the Chag on Wednesday, and hope everyone stays safe and well until then.